The judge had already reached for the papers when Noah felt a tiny hand tug at his sleeve. He leaned closer, expecting his 6-year-old daughter to ask when they could finally go home, but she stared past him instead, her little fingers tightening around his wrist. "Daddy," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "That's not my real mom." Noah blinked, following her eyes toward the woman seated behind him. Ava gave the child a reassuring smile, but the little girl didn't smile back. She looked confused, almost worried. Then, before Noah could say another word, she added in the same innocent voice, "She's pretending again." The judge looked up. Every sound in the courtroom disappeared. Welcome to Mr. Graham's story, where every story leaves a lesson. Whether you're new here or part of our growing family, thank you for being here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and as the story unfolds, tell me what you would have done in the same situation. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring more meaningful stories to people around the world. Now, let's begin today's story. The judge lowered the papers onto his desk without taking his eyes off the little girl. Noah could still feel her hand gripping his sleeve, tighter now than before. Across the courtroom, Christina stopped breathing for what felt like a full second. She had spent months listening to accusations she barely recognized, but this wasn't something anyone had prepared for. Ava shifted in her chair, the confident smile she had worn all morning fading just enough for Noah to notice. The judge leaned forward and spoke gently. "What did you just say, sweetheart?" The little girl looked at him the same way children look at adults when they don't understand why everyone else is confused. "The lady behind Daddy isn't my real mom," she said softly. "She keeps practicing." A few people exchanged puzzled glances. Someone near the back quietly cleared their throat. Noah frowned, searching his daughter's face for some sign that she was joking or mistaken, but she only held his hand a little tighter. "Practicing what?" the judge asked. She answered without hesitation, "Being my mommy, when my real mommy isn't there." No one in the courtroom knew that those few innocent words had just reopened months of carefully buried memories, or that one ordinary afternoon, which every adult had forgotten, was about to change everything. Long before anyone in a Jacksonville courtroom questioned whether Noah could protect his daughter, people knew him as the man who always showed up when he said he would. If a commercial roof started leaking the night before a business reopened, Noah was there before sunrise. If an employee's truck broke down, he quietly arranged another one without making a speech about loyalty. He wasn't the loudest person in a room, and he never tried to be. Around his crew, a promise carried more weight than enthusiasm. That way of living hadn't come naturally. Growing up outside Orlando, Noah learned early that silence could fill a house more completely than shouting. His father believed long workdays solved almost everything. If money kept coming in, the rest would work itself out. Feelings weren't discussed. Disappointments weren't revisited. When something hurt, everyone simply moved on and pretended it hadn't. As a teenager, Noah had made himself a quiet promise he never spoke aloud. If he ever had a family of his own, they would never wonder whether they mattered. Years later, that promise seemed to be coming true. His commercial roofing company had slowly become one of the most dependable contractors in Northeast Florida. The success hadn't happened overnight. It came from long days, careful decisions, and refusing to cut corners even when competitors did. Clients kept recommending him because they trusted his word, and many of his employees had stayed with him for years. One Saturday, after severe flooding damaged several Jacksonville neighborhoods, the company volunteered to help repair homes that insurance wouldn't fully cover. Noah expected a long day of hauling debris and replacing damaged materials. He didn't expect to meet Christina. She was standing outside a community center with a clipboard tucked against her side, gently directing volunteers toward different streets. A little boy stood beside her, holding a soaked picture book with pages that had swollen from floodwater. "I think it's ruined," the boy mumbled. Christina crouched until they were eye level. "It had a pretty good adventure," she said with a small smile. "Maybe we can find one that's even better." The boy smiled for the first time that morning. Noah noticed because almost nobody else did. Later that afternoon, while carrying plywood toward one of the damaged homes, He saw Christina helping an elderly woman sort through muddy family photographs spread across a folding table. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She treated every faded photograph like it still mattered. When the work finally slowed, one of the volunteers introduced them. "So, you're the roofing guy everybody's been talking about." Noah laughed softly. "I hope that's a good thing." So far, there was no instant spark, no dramatic pause. They simply kept talking while stacking empty water bottles into recycling bags. She told him she worked as an elementary school reading specialist. "I spend most of my day convincing second graders that books aren't punishment." "And does it work?" "Some days." She smiled. "Other days I lose to recess." He found himself smiling back. "What about you?" "I'm better with roofs than conversations." "I noticed." He looked at her, unsure whether she'd meant it as criticism. She laughed before he could answer. "Relax. I meant you're listening more than you're talking." It wasn't flirtation, it was observation, and somehow that made it easier. Over the next several months, they kept finding reasons to see each other. Sometimes it was dinner after work. Sometimes they volunteered together again. Sometimes they simply walked along the street, John's River, without feeling the need to fill every quiet moment. Christina never seemed uncomfortable with silence. She understood the difference between someone who had nothing to say and someone who needed time before saying it. Noah, in return, noticed things she never mentioned out loud. She always apologized when asking for help, even when she wasn't inconveniencing anyone. She remembered birthdays, favorite coffee orders, and the names of strangers' children after hearing them once. When restaurant servers looked overwhelmed, she stacked the plates before leaving. Little habits, little kindnesses, the kind that couldn't be performed for attention because nobody was watching. One evening, after helping clean up another neighborhood fundraiser, they sat on the tailgate of Noah's pickup truck eating takeout that had already gone cold. Christina looked at the families packing folding chairs into their cars. "They're tired," she said quietly. "They are. But they're still laughing." Noah watched them for a moment. "I didn't grow up around much of that." She glanced at him, but didn't press for details. Instead, she said, "Maybe someday we build something different." The words settled between them, not as a promise, more like a direction. 3 years later, surrounded by close family and longtime friends near the street, John's River, they exchanged vows beneath a clear Florida sky. The ceremony was small enough that everyone stayed afterward, talking over homemade food until the evening lights reflected across the water. As they walked back toward the parking lot, Christina slipped her hand into Noah's. "So," she teased, "still better with roofs than conversations?" He looked at her, pretending to think. "Probably." She laughed. "I can live with that." For the first time in his life, Noah believed the family he had imagined as a teenager wasn't just possible. It had already begun. Neither of them realized that the hardest seasons rarely announce themselves when everything still feels this certain. 2 years after the wedding, Noah stood in a hospital room holding a tiny pink knit cap that kept slipping over his newborn daughter's eyes. He looked completely unprepared. Christina smiled from the bed, tired enough to barely keep her eyes open. "You can take it off," she whispered. "I know." He didn't move. "What if she gets cold?" Christina laughed softly. "She's wrapped in 3 blankets. A nurse passing the doorway grinned. "First time, Dad?" "It shows?" "Just a little." Noah finally adjusted the cap, and their daughter stretched one tiny hand toward his finger. He froze again, afraid even breathing too hard might wake her. Christina watched the moment quietly. She had never seen him look so unsure, or so happy. Their daughter became the center of everything, without either of them deciding she would. Christina filled notebooks with milestones. First smile, first steps, favorite bedtime story, the way she insisted every stuffed animal deserved its own blanket before going to sleep. Children's drawings slowly covered the refrigerator, and every crayon masterpiece somehow earned a place on the wall. Noah teased her once while opening the freezer. "I think we're running out of room for actual food." Christina shrugged. "We'll survive." "On construction site coffee and refrigerator art?" She smiled. "It builds character." He laughed. and kissed the top of her head before leaving for work. Moments like that still came easily. The harder part was everything happening between them that neither noticed. Noah's company was growing faster than he had expected. Larger contracts meant hiring more crews, buying more equipment, and solving problems that never seemed to end when the workday did. He told himself it was temporary. Just one more project, one more expansion, one more year of pushing harder. Whenever Christina mentioned that their daughter had started asking why Daddy missed dinner again, Noah would pull her into a quick hug. "I know, she notices. I'm doing this for her." Christina nodded because she believed he meant it. He did. That wasn't the problem. One Friday evening, their daughter waited by the living room window, wearing a paper crown she'd made at preschool. Daddy said he'd be here before cake. Christina checked the time without answering. 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Running late. Tell her I'll make breakfast tomorrow." She stared at the message for a second before setting the phone face down. Their daughter looked up hopefully. "Is he almost here?" Christina forced a smile. "He has to finish helping somebody at work." The little girl thought about that. "Okay." She sounded disappointed for less than 10 seconds before asking if they could light the candles anyway. Children were surprisingly good at accepting what adults wish they didn't have to. The next morning, Noah made blueberry pancakes shaped like lopsided hearts. Flour somehow ended up on the kitchen floor, the dog, and his own shirt. Their daughter giggled so hard she could barely eat. Christina laughed too. For a little while, the missed birthday dinner seemed smaller than the breakfast that followed. Life settled back into its rhythm, except the rhythm had changed. Without realizing it, Noah and Christina stopped asking each other the questions that had once filled long walks by the river. "How was your day? What are you thinking about? Are you okay?" Instead, evenings became lists. The pediatrician moved her appointment. "We need groceries." "I paid the electric bill." "Your mom called." "The dishwasher's making that noise again." The conversations weren't arguments. They simply ended before either of them noticed something important had been left unsaid. Christina rarely mentioned how exhausted she felt. Her mother had always taught her that everyone carried their own burdens. Complaining only added another one. So when she stayed awake after midnight folding laundry because it was the only quiet time left in the day, she told herself she was fine. When she forgot to eat lunch because one of her struggling readers needed extra help after school, she shrugged it off. When Noah asked, "Everything okay?" While answering emails from the couch, she smiled automatically. "I'm just tired. You should get some sleep." "I will." Neither of them realized that "I'm tired" had quietly replaced conversations they used to have. It sounded harmless. It wasn't. One evening, Noah came home earlier than usual and found Christina asleep on the living room floor. Their daughter was tucked against her side with an open storybook resting across both of them. The television had turned itself off hours earlier. Neither of them had made it to bedtime. Noah stood in the doorway for a long moment before gently lifting the book away. Their daughter stirred just enough to mumble, "Daddy, I'm here." She smiled without opening her eyes. Christina didn't wake at all. Noah covered them both with a blanket before turning off the lamp. He told himself things would slow down soon. He believed it completely. Outside, his phone buzzed with a notification about a potential commercial contract that could change the future of his company. He glanced at the sleeping family in front of him, then picked up the call. The contract Noah accepted that night became the biggest project his company had ever landed. It also introduced him to people he had never needed to know before. Developers, investors, commercial property managers. Networking dinners replaced evenings at home more often than he liked. He wasn't comfortable in rooms where everyone seemed to know how to talk without saying much, but he showed up because growing the business meant learning a different side of the industry. That was where he met Ava. She wasn't the loudest person in the room. In fact, Noah barely noticed her during their first event, until she walked over while he was waiting in line for coffee. "I heard your company finished the Riverfront Plaza project early." "We did." "That's rare." "We had a good crew." She smiled. "Most owners would have said they had good leadership. They're the ones climbing the ladders." It wasn't much of a conversation, but a week later, At another industry luncheon, she remembered his answer. "How's the crew doing after all those storms?" Noah looked at her, surprised. "You remembered that? You seemed proud of them." She changed the subject before the compliment became awkward. It was something she did, often. Over the following months, their paths crossed naturally, sometimes at charity fundraisers, sometimes during commercial development meetings, sometimes at business breakfasts that started too early and served coffee that was never strong enough. Ava had a quiet talent for making people feel heard. She remembered names. She asked about people's families. She listened longer than most. Noah never felt like he was being interviewed. He felt understood. At home, life had become heavier in ways neither he nor Christina had expected. Christina's mother began having serious health problems. What started as occasional doctor's appointments turned into specialists, hospital visits, and medication schedules taped to the refrigerator. Most afternoons, Christina left school and drove straight to her mother's apartment before heading home to help their daughter with homework. She stopped saying yes when friends invited her out. There simply weren't enough hours. One evening, Noah found her sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by insurance paperwork. "You still up?" She rubbed her eyes. "I have to figure this out before tomorrow." "I can look at it this weekend." She gave him a tired smile. "It'll already be too late." He nodded, unsure what else to say. His phone buzzed. "I have to take this." She looked back down at the papers. "Okay." Neither of them noticed how ordinary moments like that had become. A few days later, Noah attended another fundraising dinner. He almost skipped it after the week he'd had, but one of his business partners insisted it would be worth the time. Halfway through the evening, Ava found him standing alone on the patio. "You look exhausted." He laughed once. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because you usually hide it better." He looked out across the river. "Things have just been busy. Work, home, everything." She didn't rush to fill the silence. When he didn't continue, she simply said, "You don't have to tell me if it's personal." That should have ended the conversation. Instead, Noah heard himself answering, "My wife's carrying a lot right now." "Is she okay?" "I think so." "You don't sound sure." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She's always tired. Her mom's been sick, and—" He stopped. "I don't know. Maybe I'm just not helping enough." Ava didn't criticize Christina. She didn't suggest Noah was right. She only nodded. "That sounds hard." It was exactly what he needed to hear. Over the next several weeks, those conversations became easier. Sometimes they lasted 5 minutes after meetings. Sometimes they happened while everyone else was leaving an event. Ava never pushed. She simply listened. When Noah mentioned that Christina had forgotten one of their daughter's school forms, Ava frowned sympathetically. Everybody gets overwhelmed. When he admitted they'd argued over another missed family dinner, she said quietly, "You're trying to provide for them. That's a difficult position to be in." She had a way of making his frustrations sound reasonable without ever saying Christina was the problem. At home, Christina noticed something she couldn't quite explain. Noah seemed farther away, even when he was sitting beside her. He smiled at messages that disappeared the moment she walked into the room. He started saying, "I'm just answering work stuff," before she had asked anything. One Saturday afternoon, while their daughter colored pictures on the living room floor, Christina looked over from the couch. "You've been distracted lately." Noah set his phone down. "Just work." She studied him for a second. "That's all?" He held her gaze. "What are you asking?" She looked away first. "I don't know." Neither of them spoke again, until their daughter proudly held up a drawing of the three of them standing beneath a bright yellow sun. "Look," she said, "we're all together." Noah smiled. "It's beautiful." Christina smiled too, but her eyes lingered on Noah a moment longer than they used to. She couldn't point to a lie. She couldn't prove anything had changed. She only knew the distance between them no longer felt accidental. Across town, Ava closed her planner after writing down the date of Noah's next industry conference. For the first time, he had called her on his own after a difficult day. She didn't celebrate. She simply smiled to herself. Trust, she believed, was never taken all at once. It was built one conversation at a time. Christina first noticed it because Noah stopped leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. It wasn't dramatic. He simply slipped it into his pocket whenever he walked away. The first few times, she barely thought about it. His company had grown. Clients called at all hours. It made sense. Then one evening, while they cleaned up after dinner, his phone lit up beside the sink. A message appeared across the screen. "Hope your meeting went better than you expected." Before Christina could even read the name, Noah picked up the phone. "Work?" she asked. "Yeah." His answer came a little too quickly. She nodded and kept rinsing dishes. Nothing else was said. Over the next few weeks, moments like that became easier to notice. He smiled at messages he never mentioned. He started attending more networking dinners than before. When she asked how they went, his answers grew shorter. "Fine. Productive. Just business." One Saturday morning, Noah mentioned a charity golf tournament sponsored by several commercial developers. "They're encouraging families to come." Christina looked up from tying their daughter's shoes. "So, we'll all go?" He hesitated. "You don't have to, if you're busy with your mom." It sounded thoughtful. Instead, it landed like an invitation that had already been withdrawn. "You want me there?" "Of course." "But." "No but. I just know you've got a lot going on." She smiled anyway. "I'll make it work." The event was crowded with local business owners, food trucks, and children running between activity tents. Their daughter immediately spotted a face painting booth. While Christina waited in line with her, Noah wandered toward a group of developers. A woman broke away from the conversation and walked over with an easy smile. "You must be Christina." Christina blinked. I'm Ava." She offered her hand. "Noah's told me what an amazing reading specialist you are." Christina shook her hand politely. "That's nice of him." Ava crouched beside the little girl. "So, you're the famous artist?" Their daughter grinned. "I can draw unicorns." "I've heard." Christina looked at Noah. "You've talked about us?" He shrugged. "People ask about family." It wasn't strange. Not really. Still, on the drive home, Christina couldn't shake the feeling that Ava knew more about their lives than she should. A few days later, Noah came home later than expected. Again, Christina had already put their daughter to bed. She was folding laundry when he walked in. "You waited up?" "I was finishing this." He noticed the basket beside her. "You should have gone to sleep." She looked at him for a moment. "You've been saying that a lot lately." He loosened his tie. "I'm just worried you're wearing yourself out." "I'm wearing myself out because I'm doing most of this alone." The words surprised both of them. Silence settled between them. Finally, Noah said, "That's not fair." She laughed once, but there wasn't much humor in it. "I know." Neither apologized. The conversation simply ended. That became another new habit. Weeks passed. Christina started questioning herself instead of Noah. Maybe she was too tired. Maybe she was imagining the distance. Maybe grief over her mother's declining health had made her overly sensitive. Then one afternoon, while picking up their daughter from school, another parent smiled. "I finally met Noah's friend from the fundraiser. Ava, right? She seems wonderful with your little girl." Christina paused. "What do you mean?" "Oh, they were coloring together while everyone waited for the auction to start." Christina forced a smile. "I must have missed that." You would have thought they'd known each other forever. The drive home felt unusually quiet. That evening, Christina watched Noah helping their daughter brush her teeth. He was laughing at something she'd said. The same warm father, the same gentle voice. Nothing looked different. That was almost the hardest part. After bedtime, Noah settled onto the couch with his laptop. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, smiled, turned the screen over. Christina walked into the living room carrying 2 mugs of tea. She set one beside him. "Can I ask you something?" He closed the laptop halfway. "Sure." She sat across from him, instead of beside him. "Who is Ava to you?" He looked up immediately. "A business contact." "Just that?" "Yes." She waited. "So why does she know so much about our family?" He frowned. "What does that mean?" "She knew what I do. She knew our daughter likes drawing, Other parents think she spends time with her. They've met at company events. Without me. Christina. Noah. He leaned back. I think you're making something out of nothing. She searched his face. I hope I am. He picked up his mug, but didn't drink. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Christina asked the question she'd been trying not to ask for weeks. Are you talking to her about us? Noah looked away before answering. Sometimes. Her stomach tightened. How much is sometimes? He exhaled slowly. Enough that I think we need to have a different conversation. Everything inside Christina suddenly went still. Noah set his mug on the coffee table without looking at Christina. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the dishwasher humming in the kitchen. Christina didn't move. She had asked the question, but she wasn't sure she wanted the answer anymore. What do you mean? She said quietly. A different conversation. Noah rubbed both hands across his face. I should have told you sooner. Her eyes stayed on him. Sooner? About what? He looked toward the hallway where their daughter was sleeping. I don't want to do this while she's here. You don't get to choose when this happens. His shoulders sank. I know. Another long silence. Then he said the words that neither of them could ever take back. There's someone else. Christina stared at him. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She simply looked at him as if she hadn't understood the sentence. What did you say? I've been seeing someone. Seeing? He nodded once. It wasn't supposed to happen. She let out one short laugh that sounded more confused than amused. Nobody plans that part. He didn't argue. I never meant to hurt you. She stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen. Noah watched her open a cabinet, close it again, then stand perfectly still with one hand resting against the counter. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. Who is she? He hesitated. You already know her. Christina closed her eyes. Ava. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. A tear slipped down Christina's cheek before she brushed it away almost impatiently. How long? A few months. A few months. She repeated softly. She turned back toward him. So every time you told me you had another dinner, another meeting, another fundraiser. He lowered his head. I know. No. Her voice cracked for the first time. You don't. Upstairs, a bedroom door creaked. Both of them froze. Small footsteps crossed the hallway. Their daughter appeared at the bottom of the stairs holding her favorite stuffed rabbit. Mommy? Christina wiped her face so quickly it almost looked practiced. I'm right here, sweetheart. I had a bad dream. Without thinking, Christina opened her arms. The little girl climbed into her lap. Noah watched them from across the room. His daughter looked at him. Daddy? He forced a smile. I'm here. She yawned. Can we all watch cartoons tomorrow? Neither adult answered. She was asleep again before Christina carried her back upstairs. When Christina returned, she remained standing. I don't want her hearing us fight. I don't either. So we won't. Noah looked surprised. Christina folded her arms tightly across herself. You've already made your decision. It's not that simple. It stopped being simple when you started lying. He nodded. She waited for him to defend himself. He didn't. Instead, he quietly said, I'm sorry. The words landed with almost no weight, not because they weren't sincere, because they had arrived too late. Over the next several weeks, they met with attorneys, divided financial records, and worked through paperwork neither had ever imagined signing. The hardest conversations weren't about the house or the bank accounts. They were about their daughter. I don't want her choosing sides, Christina said during one meeting. Neither do I. I won't speak badly about you. I won't speak badly about you either. For the first time in weeks, they agreed on something. It became the foundation of their divorce. Respect first. Their daughter first. Everything else later. When the paperwork was finally filed, Noah walked Christina to her car. Neither knew what people were supposed to say after ending a marriage that had once felt permanent. Finally, Christina spoke. I hope she's never made to feel like this was her fault. She won't. You promise? I promise. She searched his face. For a moment, she believed him. Across town, Ava sat alone on her apartment balcony, reading through a folder Noah had casually left in his truck after one of their meetings. Inside were copies of the temporary parenting schedule, contact information for their daughter's school, and notes from Noah's attorney. She smiled faintly before sliding every page neatly back into place. Then she opened her planner and wrote one sentence beneath next month's date. Become indispensable. When Noah called later that evening, she answered on the second ring. Everything okay? She asked. He sounded exhausted. It's official. I'm sorry. He closed his eyes. I just want this to stay peaceful. Ava's voice was gentle. It will. She meant every word. She simply had a very different idea of what peaceful was going to look like at first. The problems looked too ordinary to mean anything. Christina emailed Noah to ask if he could switch weekends because her mother's specialist had moved an appointment. No reply. 3 days later, Noah called. I don't understand why you didn't tell me. I did. I never got anything. She checked her sent folder while they were still on the phone. It's right here. I don't have it. Neither accused the other of lying. They both assumed it was a mistake. Then another one happened. The following month, Noah arrived at their daughter's school for a literacy program Christina had organized. She looked genuinely surprised to see him. I thought you weren't coming. I never said that. The teacher told me you declined. I never got invited. The teacher apologized, insisting she'd sent the notice to both parents. Noah shrugged it off. Christina couldn't. Small things kept slipping through invisible cracks. A dentist appointment appeared on Noah's calendar a day late. A pickup time somehow changed by 30 minutes. A school newsletter reached one parent, but not the other. Each mistake had a reasonable explanation. Together, they slowly created something neither of them intended. Doubt. Noah found himself thinking Christina had become unusually disorganized. Christina began wondering why everything seemed to go wrong only when it involved Noah. Around the same time, Ava became more involved in Noah's daily life. She offered to help organize documents for the custody case. You've already got enough on your plate, she said one evening, as stacks of paperwork covered his dining table. I can alphabetize things, scan files, whatever helps. You don't have to. I know, she smiled. I want to. He was grateful. His attorney appreciated having everything neatly arranged before meetings. No one questioned where the files had been before arriving on the lawyer's desk. One afternoon, Noah stopped by his attorney's office. As they reviewed notes, the attorney frowned. Your daughter's teacher documented that Christina seemed emotionally overwhelmed during pickup last month. Noah looked up. What happened? Nothing major. Apparently she cried in the parking lot. He stared at the page. Christina hadn't mentioned crying. He folded the report closed without saying much. That evening, he almost called her. Instead, he remembered another missed email. Another scheduling mistake. Another forgotten form. He put the phone back down. Across town, Christina was having a very different conversation. One of the mothers from school hesitated before speaking. I wasn't sure whether to ask. Well, ask what? Are you doing okay? Christina smiled politely. Why wouldn't I be? The woman shifted uncomfortably. I've just heard you've been under a lot of stress. I have. And, well... She stopped herself. It's probably none of my business. Driving home, Christina replayed the conversation over and over. She couldn't figure out what she had said or done that would make people suddenly speak to her with careful voices. The whispers spread quietly. A neighbor offered to keep an eye on things if she ever needed help. Another parent stopped inviting her to weekend playdates. Even one of her coworkers gently suggested she consider taking personal leave. Nobody was openly cruel. That somehow made it worse. No one would tell her exactly what they believed, only that they seemed to believe something. During one custody meeting, Noah's attorney slid another folder across the table. We've collected statements from several people concerned about instability. Noah frowned. What kind of instability? Emotional, forgetfulness, mood changes. He looked through the pages. Individually, none of the statements seemed especially alarming. Together, they painted a picture that was difficult to ignore. He remembered Christina forgetting a school permission slip, falling asleep on the living room floor, missing lunch because she'd been overwhelmed. He quietly connected moments that had never seemed connected before. Confirmation felt easier than questioning. Meanwhile, Christina sat in her attorney's office holding an identical stack of papers. "I don't understand," she whispered. Her attorney adjusted his glasses. "Neither do I. People are describing someone I don't recognize. We're going to challenge every claim. But where are they getting this?" He didn't have an answer. For the first time since the divorce began, Christina realized she wasn't only fighting accusations. She was fighting a version of herself that seemed to exist everywhere except inside her own life. As she walked to her car, her phone buzzed. It was her sister. "I just wanted to check on you. I'm okay." A pause. "Chris." "Yeah? I had 2 people ask me today if you've been drinking." Christina stopped walking. "What?" "I told them absolutely not." Another silence. Then her sister asked the question that stayed with Christina long after the call ended. "What is happening to you?" Christina looked across the parking lot, suddenly aware that she didn't know the answer anymore. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just losing an argument. She was slowly losing the trust of people who had known her for years. The first time Noah handed Ava a folder from his attorney, it felt practical. "I'm never going to keep all this straight," he said, setting a stack of papers on the dining room table. Half of it's school records, half of it's legal stuff. Ava pulled a yellow legal pad closer. "Let's organize it." "You don't mind?" She smiled. "I color code my grocery lists." He laughed. "I should have guessed." By the end of the evening, every document sat neatly labeled inside matching binders. Noah felt lighter. It never occurred to him that he had also handed someone complete control over the order in which information reached him. A few days later, his attorney called. "I've got another statement supporting concerns about Christina." Noah rubbed his forehead. "From who?" "A parent at your daughter's school." He nodded slowly. "Send it over." The statement was waiting when he got home. It described Christina as distracted, emotionally overwhelmed, and occasionally forgetful. Nothing in it was completely false. She had been exhausted. She had forgotten things. She had cried once in a parking lot after learning her mother's condition had worsened. Each fact stood on its own. Together, they suggested something much darker. Noah closed the folder. "I hate this," he muttered. Ava looked up from the kitchen island. "You still wish things had worked out." "I do. You can feel that way and still do what's best for your daughter." He didn't answer. The sentence stayed with him long after dinner. Over the following weeks, documents continued arriving. Some reached Noah directly. Others were already sitting on the dining room table before he came home. "I printed those for you," Ava would say. Or, "I highlighted the important parts." Eventually, he stopped wondering where each document had come from. He simply trusted that if something mattered, Ava had already found it. Across town, Christina felt like every conversation ended the same way. "I'm telling you, that's not what happened." Her attorney sighed quietly. "I believe you. Then why does nobody else?" He slid another page across the desk. "This came in yesterday." She read it twice. A school volunteer claimed Christina had forgotten to pick up her daughter after an after-school reading program. Christina stared at the page. "I wasn't late." She looked up. "I was there early." Her attorney frowned. "Can you prove it?" She opened her mouth, then stopped. She couldn't. She remembered parking, walking inside, signing the attendance sheet, but the sheet was gone. The volunteer sounded certain. The written statement looked official. "I don't understand," she whispered. Her attorney leaned back. "Neither do I." The harder Christina tried to explain each misunderstanding, the more defensive she sounded. The more defensive she sounded, the more people seemed to believe she was hiding something. Meanwhile, Noah's attorney spread several folders across the conference table. "When we present these together, they establish a pattern." Noah looked at the papers. Missed communication, forgotten appointments, witness concerns, emotional instability. None of them felt overwhelming by themselves. Together, they painted a picture he could no longer ignore. His attorney tapped the top folder. The court isn't deciding whether Christina loves your daughter. I know. They're deciding where your daughter will have the most stability. Noah looked down. I never wanted it to become this. I believe you. He did too. Walking back to his truck, Noah sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. He pulled out his phone. For several seconds, Christina's name remained on the screen. He almost called, almost asked if they could sit down somewhere without lawyers, without paperwork, without accusations. Before he could press the button, another message appeared. Ava, don't forget your attorney needs the updated school records before tomorrow. I already printed everything. Noah lowered the phone. He drove home instead. Without realizing it, he had stopped checking the original source. He trusted the version of events that reached him first. And from that point forward, almost every version reached him through Ava. By the time the custody case was moving through the court system, Noah's daughter had settled into a routine no 6-year-old should have needed. Some weekends, she stayed with her father. Other days, she stayed with Christina. She carried the same pink backpack between both homes, careful not to leave her favorite stuffed rabbit behind because, as she once explained, he gets lonely. The adults smiled when she said things like that. They forgot children noticed far more than they understood. One Saturday morning, Noah left the kitchen to answer a call from his attorney. Ava stayed behind with the little girl, helping her color at the dining room table. What are you drawing? Ava asked. My school. And who's that? My mommy. Ava smiled. What about me? The little girl looked up. You don't live at school. Ava laughed softly. No, I mean, if I was in the picture. The little girl thought for a second before picking up a green crayon. You can stand by Daddy. That sounds nice. She watched the child finish coloring before speaking again. You know, if somebody ever asks whether we have fun together. The little girl nodded. We do. We sure do. Ava smiled warmly. So just remember that, okay? The little girl looked confused. I already remember. Good. The conversation ended there. To Ava, it had been harmless. To a 6-year-old, it was simply another strange thing adults said. A few weeks later, Noah stopped by Ava's townhouse before they drove to a charity luncheon. His daughter sat in the living room, building a castle from plastic blocks while Ava finished getting ready upstairs. The house was unusually quiet. Then she heard Ava talking. No, if the judge asks, I'll explain that she's always comfortable with me. A pause. No, don't say it like that. Say. The little girl stacked another block. She's known me for a long time. That sounds better. Silence. Then Ava laughed quietly. We should probably practice that again. The child looked toward the staircase. Nobody came down. She returned to her castle. Later that afternoon, she tugged on Noah's hand. Daddy? Yeah, sweetheart. What does practice mean? He smiled. For what? When grown-ups keep saying the same thing. He barely looked away from the road. Depends. Like before school? Sometimes. She seemed satisfied. Oh. He never asked why. The answer drifted away with the rest of the drive. Another evening, Ava helped her brush her hair after bath time. You've gotten so good at sitting still. The little girl grinned. I don't like knots. I don't either. Ava gently worked through another tangle. If anybody ever asks, you can tell them I help with your hair sometimes. I can. And remember when we baked cookies together? We burned them. Ava laughed. We did. The little girl laughed too. They tasted funny. They sure did. Ava tucked a loose strand behind the child's ear. So, if somebody asks whether you like being here, I'll tell them. What will you tell them? That the cookies were yucky. Ava blinked, then laughed again. No, I mean that we have fun. We do. Exactly. The little girl nodded. She still didn't understand why certain memories seemed more important to Ava than others. That night, back at Christina's apartment, She climbed into bed carrying her rabbit under one arm. "Mommy?" Christina looked up from the bedtime story. "Yeah, baby? Why do big people practice talking?" Christina smiled absent-mindedly. "For school? I don't know." "What made you think of that?" The little girl shrugged. "Ava practices." Christina paused. "Practices what?" "Talking." "To who?" She hugged the rabbit. "Nobody." Christina waited. The little girl had already moved on. "Can we read the bunny book again?" Christina studied her daughter for another second before opening the book. She almost asked another question. Instead, she kissed the little girl's forehead and began reading. Across town, Ava sat at her dining room table reviewing tomorrow's custody notes. She quietly repeated a few sentences under her breath, changing a word here, softening another there. Then she smiled. From the hallway, the little girl watched for just a moment before wandering back toward the guest bedroom. She didn't know why Ava kept talking to herself. She only knew there was a word for it. Pretending, or maybe practicing. She wasn't quite sure which one the grown-ups used. By early spring, the family court issued a temporary order. Until the custody evaluation was complete, Christina's parenting time would be supervised. Her attorney tried to soften the news. "It's temporary." She nodded. "I know. The court hasn't made a final decision." "I know." But hearing those words and living them turned out to be two very different things. The first supervised visit took place at a family visitation center on the west side of Jacksonville. The room looked as cheerful as someone had been able to make it. Bright rugs, shelves filled with board games, plastic bins of toys that had been handled by hundreds of children. Christina hated every inch of it, not because of the room, because someone she had never met sat quietly in the corner with a clipboard, watching her hug her own daughter. The little girl ran straight into Christina's arms before anyone could say a word. "Mommy." Christina held her tightly. "I missed you." "I missed you more." The little girl pulled back just enough to study her mother's face. "Did you cry?" Christina smiled, maybe a little. "I don't like when you cry." "I don't either." The supervisor cleared her throat gently. "You have an hour together." Christina nodded without looking away from her daughter. They spent most of the visit drawing pictures. One drawing showed a little white house with 3 stick figures holding hands. Christina noticed there were no separate homes. Only one. She didn't ask about it. The hour disappeared too quickly. When it was time to leave, the little girl wrapped both arms around Christina's waist. "I want to go with Mommy." Christina closed her eyes. "I know, sweetheart." "Please?" The supervisor stepped closer. "We have to go now." The little girl looked at Noah. "Daddy?" He crouched beside her. "We'll see Mommy again soon." She searched his face. "Today? No." "Tomorrow?" He hesitated. "Not tomorrow." She lowered her head. "Okay." On the drive home, Noah couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd reached for Christina without hesitation. He tightened both hands on the steering wheel. "Kids need consistency," he reminded himself. "This is normal. They're adjusting." He repeated the thought until it sounded true. At school, things changed for Christina in quieter ways. Conversation stopped when she entered the teacher's lounge. Parents who had once chatted after dismissal now smiled politely before walking towards someone else. One afternoon she overheard 2 mothers talking outside the library. "I just feel bad for the little girl." "So do I." Neither woman realized Christina was only a few feet away. She kept walking. At home, she stopped checking social media because every family photograph reminded her of what she'd lost. She stopped calling friends after too many conversations ended with, "I'm sure everything will work out." Nobody asked what had actually happened anymore. They had already decided. One Friday evening, Christina sat alone at her kitchen table staring at a half-finished cup of tea. Her phone buzzed. It was her sister. "You didn't answer my messages." "I know. You okay?" A long pause. Then Christina quietly admitted something she hadn't said out loud before. "I don't know how to convince people. I'm still me." Her sister didn't rush to answer. Finally she said, "You don't convince people." "What do I do?" "You keep showing up." Christina looked toward the refrigerator. Her daughter's latest drawing was still held in place by a small magnet shaped like a sunflower. 3 stick figures. 1 house. She smiled through fresh tears. I can do that. The custody evaluator completed interviews over the following weeks. Neighbors, teachers, family members. Noah answered every question honestly, as he understood it. Christina answered every question, hoping someone would finally hear the difference between exhaustion and instability. The final hearing was scheduled for the following month. Outside the courthouse, Noah's attorney sounded quietly optimistic. I think we're in a strong position. Across the parking lot, Christina stood beside her own attorney, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the sleeves of her jacket. She wasn't trying to look confident anymore. She was simply trying not to fall apart before walking inside. As both parents entered through separate courthouse doors, neither of them noticed the one person carrying a memory no lawyer had asked about. Their 6-year-old daughter held her stuffed rabbit close and looked toward the courtroom, wondering if today would finally be the day the grown-ups stopped pretending. By the time the final custody hearing began, most people in the courtroom believed they already knew how it would end. Noah sat beside his attorney, wearing the same navy suit he reserved for contracts that mattered. His hands rested quietly on the table, but he hadn't stopped rubbing his wedding ring's old tan line with his thumb since they arrived. Across the aisle, Christina looked thinner than she had a year earlier. Her hair was neatly pulled back. Her jacket had been carefully pressed. She had done everything she could to look composed. It still couldn't hide the exhaustion around her eyes. She leaned toward her attorney. How much longer? They're almost ready. She nodded once. Neither spoke again. Behind Noah, Ava quietly organized binders on the bench. Whenever his attorney needed a document, it was already open to the correct page. Attendance records. She handed over the folder. School evaluations. Another folder appeared. Everything seemed effortless. The bailiff called the courtroom to order. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Once seated, the judge reviewed the final exhibits before turning toward both attorneys. We've spent several months hearing testimony and reviewing evidence concerning the best interests of this child. His voice remained calm. The court recognizes that both parents clearly love their daughter. Christina lowered her eyes. Noah looked toward his little girl sitting quietly beside the court-appointed child advocate. She swung one foot beneath her chair, hugging the same stuffed rabbit she carried almost everywhere. She wasn't listening to legal arguments. She was trying to keep the rabbit's ear from folding over. The morning passed with final testimony. Christina's attorney challenged inconsistencies in witness statements. Noah's attorney emphasized stability. Each side believed it had done enough. Near the end of the hearing, the judge removed his reading glasses. The question before this court is not which parent is perfect. He paused. It is which home presently offers the greatest consistency and stability. Noah looked down. He hadn't wanted to hear Christina described as unstable. He had simply reached a point where he believed it might be true. That belief still hurt. Across the room, Christina folded her hands together so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She had stopped trying to read the judge's expression hours ago. There was nothing left to interpret. Everything that could be said had already been said. The judge continued. The evidence presented establishes a concerning pattern regarding missed communications, scheduling difficulties, emotional regulation, and... His voice faded into the background for Christina. She stared at one photograph lying on the evidence table. It showed her helping their daughter plant flowers months earlier. No lawyer had used it. No witness had mentioned it. Somehow the ordinary moments had never seemed important enough to enter the record. The judge reached for the final pages of his written decision. The court therefore finds. Noah quietly leaned toward his daughter. He offered a reassuring smile. It'll be okay, sweetheart. She looked up at him, then past him. Her eyes settled on Ava. The smile disappeared from her face. Instead of relaxing, she reached for Noah's sleeve with both hands. Daddy. He leaned closer. What is it? The little girl whispered something so softly that only he could hear. His expression changed immediately. What did you say? She glanced toward Ava again. That's not my real mom. For the first time all morning, Noah forgot the judge was speaking. He stared at his daughter. What do you mean? Before she could answer, the judge stopped reading. He slowly looked over the top of his glasses. I'm sorry. The courtroom became perfectly still. Did someone say something? Noah hadn't realized he was still holding his daughter's hand until she gently pulled it free. The judge looked toward the child advocate. Would it be appropriate if I spoke with her for a moment? Both attorneys exchanged quick glances. Christina's attorney nodded first. Noah's attorney stood. No objection, Your Honor. The judge's voice softened. Sweetheart, can you tell me what you just told your dad? The little girl looked at Noah before answering, as though asking permission without saying a word. He gave the smallest nod he could manage. She turned back to the judge. I said. She pointed toward Ava. That's not my real mom. No one spoke. The judge waited. What made you say that? The little girl frowned, genuinely puzzled by the question. Because my real mommy is over there. She pointed to Christina. A few people smiled gently. The judge smiled too. I understand that. But your dad wasn't calling her your mommy. I know. You do? She nodded. She's pretending. The smile disappeared from the judge's face. What do you mean by pretending? The little girl hugged her stuffed rabbit. Sometimes she practices. Ava shifted in her seat. Her attorney instincts weren't sharp enough to hide it, but the movement caught Noah's attention. The judge noticed it too. What does she practice, sweetheart? The child answered the way children answer when they don't realize they're saying anything important. Being mommy. Silence. The judge leaned forward. Can you help us understand that? She nodded eagerly. One day, Daddy was outside talking on his phone. Noah searched his memory. There were cookies. Another memory flickered. A fundraiser. His truck. Ava's townhouse afterward. He remembered leaving to answer a call from his attorney. The little girl continued. She said we should remember how much fun we had. The judge asked carefully, who said that? Ava. Across the courtroom, Ava finally spoke. Your Honor, she's 6. I think she's confused. The judge raised one hand without looking at her. You'll have an opportunity to respond. Then he looked back at the little girl. What happened after that? We talked about cookies. She smiled. We burned them. A few quiet chuckles escaped around the courtroom. Then she added something that erased every trace of amusement. She said, if anybody asked, I should remember we had fun together. The courtroom fell silent again. The judge didn't interrupt. What else do you remember? The little girl scrunched her face while thinking. Sometimes she talked to herself. Noah frowned. What do you mean? She looked at him. She'd say stuff. What kind of stuff? The child shrugged. I don't know. Then her eyes brightened. Oh! Everyone looked at her. She'd say it one way. The little girl paused, trying to remember. Then she'd say it another way. She demonstrated with both hands, as if moving invisible puzzle pieces around. Then she'd smile. The judge asked quietly, Did she ever tell you why? She said we had to get it right. Ava's face lost its color. Christina hadn't moved since her daughter began speaking. She wasn't celebrating. She was barely breathing. Noah looked over his shoulder. For the first time since meeting Ava, he noticed something he had never seen before. She wasn't looking at the little girl. She wasn't looking at the judge. She was staring at the table in front of her, as though calculating. The judge folded his hands. Sweetheart. He chose his next words carefully. When you said she was pretending. The little girl corrected him immediately. No. No? She shook her head. Practicing. The judge blinked. Practicing what? The child answered with complete innocence. Practicing being my mommy when my real mommy wasn't there. No one spoke. Not the attorneys, not the bailiff, not even Ava. Because everyone in that courtroom suddenly understood the same thing at exactly the same moment. The little girl's words didn't prove anyone had manipulated the custody case, but they did something almost as important. For the first time in months, they made the court question whether the story it had been hearing was the complete one. The judge slowly closed the file containing his written decision. Then he looked directly at both attorneys. "I will not be issuing a ruling today." The judge remained seated for several seconds after closing the file. Nobody spoke. Finally, he looked at both attorneys. The court has an obligation to reach the correct decision, not simply the quickest one. He turned toward the bailiff. "We'll take a brief recess." The room erupted into quiet conversations the moment the judge stepped through the side door. Noah's attorney leaned close. "She's a child. The judge may decide it doesn't change anything." Noah wasn't listening. He kept replaying the same sentence. "She's pretending again." Across the courtroom, Christina knelt beside her daughter. "You did great, sweetheart." The little girl looked confused. "Did I say something bad?" Christina pulled her into a hug. "No, baby." The child relaxed. "I just told the truth." Those words reached Noah before anyone else did. For the first time in months, certainty slipped away. Less than an hour later, everyone returned to the courtroom. The judge addressed both legal teams before anyone could resume arguments. "Before I issue a final ruling, I want additional clarification regarding the documentary evidence submitted by both parties." He looked toward Noah's attorney. Several communications referenced during this hearing appear to have originated as electronic records. "Yes, Your Honor. I want the original digital records produced." The attorney hesitated. "We have printed copies. I asked for the originals." The difference mattered. Noah slowly turned toward Ava. She gave him a reassuring smile. "It'll be fine," she whispered. It was the first time those words didn't reassure him. Over the following week, the hearing remained open while both attorneys gathered additional records. The school district produced server logs. Email providers supplied transmission histories. Calendar invitations were retrieved directly from their original accounts instead of printed copies. One afternoon, Christina's attorney called with unusual excitement. "I need you to come in." She arrived 20 minutes later. He slid a laptop across his desk. "Look at this." On the screen sat two versions of the same email. One had been introduced during the custody proceedings. The other had come directly from the email provider. Christina frowned. "They're different. The wording isn't." He pointed lower. "The forwarding history is." Several messages had been redirected before reaching Noah. Others had never reached him at all. Not because Christina failed to send them, because someone had altered where they went afterward. Christina looked up. "I'm starting to think we can." Meanwhile, Noah met privately with his attorney. "I don't understand." The attorney placed another report on the desk. "The metadata from several files doesn't match when they were supposedly created." "What does that mean?" "It means someone opened them, modified them, then printed them." Noah stared. "I thought these came straight from the school." "So did I." A long silence followed. Finally, Noah asked the question he had avoided asking for months. "Who had access to all this?" The attorney didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another folder. Inside was a timeline. School emails, calendar changes, witness statements, legal documents. Nearly every piece of information had passed through the same person before reaching Noah. Ava. His chest tightened. "No." He said it quietly, almost to himself. "To be another explanation." "I hope there is," his attorney replied. "So do I." As investigators re-interviewed witnesses, small cracks appeared everywhere. One parent admitted she had never personally seen Christina forget to collect her daughter. She had only repeated something another parent mentioned. A volunteer acknowledged she couldn't actually remember who arrived late that afternoon. She had relied on handwritten notes that no longer existed. A teacher quietly corrected an earlier statement after discovering an attendance log had been copied incorrectly. None of the corrections proved Christina innocent by themselves. Late that evening, Noah drove home in complete silence. Ava was waiting in the kitchen. "How did it go?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed a folder on the counter. "I have a question." She smiled gently. "Okay." "When those school records came to me." His voice remained calm. "Where exactly did you get them?" For the first time since he'd met her, Ava didn't answer immediately. It lasted only a second, but Noah saw it. A hesitation, a calculation, a choice. And in that single moment, he realized something he wished he had questioned months earlier. He no longer knew whether the woman standing in front of him had ever been honest at all. The investigation moved faster once people stopped assuming the original story was correct. Email records were recovered directly from service providers. School administrators confirmed that several forwarded messages had been redirected before reaching Noah. Calendar invitations had been altered after they were created. No single discovery explained everything. Together, they revealed a pattern no one had noticed while looking at each incident by itself. The hardest part for Noah wasn't learning that documents had been manipulated. It was realizing how rarely he had asked to see the original source. One afternoon, his attorney slid the last report across the conference table. "I think we've reached the end of this." Noah stared at the pages. "I kept telling myself I was protecting my daughter." His attorney nodded. "I believe you were." "I wasn't protecting her." His voice cracked. "I was protecting the version of the story that made the most sense to me." For a long time, neither man spoke. When Noah finally stood, he drove somewhere he hadn't expected. Christina's apartment. She opened the door, but didn't invite him inside. They looked at each other for several seconds. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say. None of it survived seeing her face. "I was wrong." Christina didn't answer. "I should have listened to you." Still nothing. "I should have asked more questions." She leaned against the doorframe. "You should have." There was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion. What swallowed hard. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I can't even think about forgiveness right now." He nodded. "I know." She looked past him toward the parking lot. "Do you know what hurt the most?" He waited. "It wasn't that you believed someone else." She finally looked at him again. "It was that you stopped believing the person who had spent years building a life with you." The words landed harder than anything the court had said. "I don't have an excuse." "No, you don't." Another long silence. Then Christina quietly asked, "Did you ever wonder why our daughter never stopped reaching for me?" He closed his eyes. "I told myself children needed time." "You told yourself whatever fit." He couldn't argue. She opened the door a little wider. "Our daughter's inside." He looked up. "I know. She's excited to see you." His eyes filled. "I don't deserve that." "No." Christina said it gently. "But she's 6. A moment later, little footsteps raced across the apartment. "Daddy!" She threw her arms around him before he could kneel. He hugged her tightly. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. She pulled back. "For what?" He smiled sadly. "You'll understand someday." She took his hand. "Come see my new books." Children had a way of walking forward before adults were ready. Noah followed her inside, carrying a weight that no court order could ever remove. He knew the investigation had uncovered Ava's choices. Now he had to live with his own. When the custody hearing resumed, the courtroom felt different, not because anyone had forgotten the past, because certainty had disappeared. The judge spoke carefully. "The evidence presented since our last hearing significantly changes the court's understanding of this case." He acknowledged the recovered electronic records, corrected witness statements, and evidence that communications had been improperly altered before reaching Noah. The court also noted that Noah had relied on information he believed to be genuine. His failures had been real. So had his manipulation. The judge turned toward Christina. "The court finds no credible evidence that you are an unfit parent." Christina closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she let herself breathe. Then the judge looked at Noah. "You made serious errors in judgment." Noah nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. But the evidence does not support a finding that you acted with malicious intent toward your daughter." The final order reflected both truths. Christina would retain primary custody. Noah would receive substantial parenting time under a structured co-parenting plan. The judge encouraged both parents to participate in family counseling focused on rebuilding trust for their daughter's benefit. As for Ava, the court referred the matter to the appropriate authorities after finding evidence suggesting interference with communications and the custody process. When everyone stood to leave, Noah didn't celebrate. Neither did Christina. There was nothing to celebrate. There was only another chance to do better. Outside the courthouse, Noah looked toward Christina. "I'll be there Friday." She studied him for a second. "For her?" "For her." She gave one small nod. "I'll tell her." 6 months later, life no longer revolved around court dates. It revolved around ordinary Tuesdays, school reading mornings, soccer practices, homework spread across kitchen tables. Noah began arranging work around the moments he used to promise he would make time for later. One afternoon, he sat cross-legged in a first-grade classroom, reading a picture book while 20 children corrected every funny voice he tried to use. His daughter laughed the loudest. "You made the bear sound like a duck." "I did?" "Yep," the class agreed. He laughed with them. After school, Christina watched from across the parking lot as their daughter ran toward Noah before turning back to hug her too. No one rushed her. No one asked her to choose. It wasn't perfect. Some conversations between Noah and Christina were still awkward. Some ended in silence. Trust returned slowly, the same way it had once been lost. One evening, after Noah helped tuck their daughter into bed, she looked from him to Christina. "Can everybody stop pretending now?" The room grew quiet. Noah glanced at Christina. She didn't answer. Their daughter hugged her stuffed rabbit. "I like it better when everybody just tells the truth." Noah sat on the edge of the bed. "So do I." As he switched off the bedroom light, he realized something he would carry for the rest of his life. For months, adults had argued over reports, emails, schedules, and carefully arranged evidence. The one person who never tried to persuade anyone had simply described what she saw. She hadn't accused. She hadn't defended. She hadn't even understood the importance of her own words. She had only told the truth the way children often do, without strategy, without fear, and without realizing that honesty can be powerful enough to change the course of a family's future. Healing didn't arrive all at once. Forgiveness wasn't promised, but the pretending was finally over. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough to begin building something real again. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you had been in Noah's position, would you have realized something was wrong sooner? And after everything Christina went through, do you think you could ever truly forgive someone who believed everyone else before believing you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and your perspective might encourage someone else who's listening today. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Mr. Graham's Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story that reminds us how powerful truth, love, and second chances can be. Most of all, remember this: the loudest story isn't always the truest one. Sometimes the person who sees the truth most clearly is the one nobody thinks to ask. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care of yourself, be kind to the people you love, and I'll see you in the next story.
Thank you for watching Mr. Graham Stories, my beautiful, amazing family.